All right, you guys. Hello and welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here. My name is Heather, and today we are going to talk about fourth house. So I have been working really hard. It's kind of embarrassing because it's 2026 and a 7-year-old could probably do this, but I've been really trying to figure out how to pull up like a PowerPoint or a slide deck, as people today now call it. Um, so I have advanced, but it's not going to be very smooth. So please be patient with me as I learn these things. But let's go ahead and look at a little visual for everything about the fourth house. See, this is where it's not too slick, but just pretend like that didn't happen. Okay, here we are. So the fourth house, the foundation of you. The fourth house is all about the home, your roots. It can have to do with the emotions that you might not show everyone. It's your inner world. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But first, okay, finally also figured out how to pull up a birth chart. Again, 7-year-olds could probably teach me how to do this, but here we are. So this is my birth chart. So we've talked about the first house, right, which is in about like the 8 o'clock-ish position, the second, the third, and so now we're on the fourth. So the fourth house is the bottom of your chart, right? We'll go back to this one. So the fourth house here, where it starts, is exactly opposite of the start of the 10th house. The 10th house is where the sun was highest in the day that you were born, meaning that the fourth house was the darkest and the deepest point of the day that you were born. So it's very hidden. You saw probably where it says IC for the bottom, that Imam Coeli, I don't know, versus the MC, which is more broadly said as the midheaven, right? So the IC versus the MC. Again, we can go back. We have the IC, the start of the fourth house, the darkest point of the day. And then we have the MC, where the sun was at its highest point during the day. So, yeah, the fourth house, like I said, it's all about your roots. It's your past. It's like when you come home at night where you take your mask off, right? And it makes sense that it would be the home because this is the Cancer ruled areas of life. And Cancer is all about the house. It can rule like real estate. It's specifically your family, but your family of origin, and kind of like there's a little bit of a polarity of like most people will associate the fourth house with like your family of origin, your more earlier years in life. But then it will also come up again as like later in life and like where you go to retire. So it seems from most of what I've seen, it's like early life, maybe what you almost don't have control over, like your parents are making these decisions in different aspects of your life. And then, yeah, later in life when you retire. Um, the ruler of the fourth house is the moon. And you know what I've actually done? So I had gotten a few questions about like, well, what if I don't have any planets in this house? So something that I have added is you can look to see where the house starts, okay? And you're gonna look on, they go counterclockwise, okay? So if I were to look here, Gemini is the ruler of my fourth house, and I've added in what that can mean. So even if you don't have planets in the fourth house, you will have a sign that is on the cusp, is what they call it. And again, these move counterclockwise. So yes, Gemini is my fourth house ruler. And hopefully that, if you don't have any planets, maybe this could just bring a little bit of depth to it. So yes, the ruler is the moon, and it has kind of like Cancer is the crab in astrology. And I think it's very fitting that Cancer, like the health condition, has these tumors, right? It's very, in my opinion, similar to the crab, where it's like you have this hard exterior shell, and then inside is like, not pleasantness if you have like Cancer, the health condition. But then, I think it's like with the crab, then it's like soft underneath that hard shell. And, to me, it's like maybe the outside world is where you have to put up your hard shell. But then when you're at home, that's where, you can feel a little bit safer and let that softness flow out a little bit more easily. And then the last thing that I do want to bring up before we get into the planetary placements is the fourth house, 10th house axis. And what I mean by that is, since we are on like this little pizza pie, the fourth house is opposite of the 10th house, right? And so last time I talked about the third house versus the ninth house, and like, how you can have similar themes, but they play out differently, right? And this is similar um, throughout the whole chart. So the fourth house, 10th house axis, we've talked about the fourth house is your private life, your home life. Um, and the 10th house is what you show the world, right? It's your public life, it's your work life. So it's this home work balance. Um, Again, since the fourth house is more associated with the past and like your family of origin, your 10th house is going to be like, where you're going. Maybe the fourth house was also like things that you didn't have control over those decisions. As I said, like sometimes it could be more your parents making those decisions. This is where you get to decide where you're going, is the 10th house. And then I've watched a lot of videos on the fourth house, and some people think it's like both parents, but it does seem to be more commonly thought that the fourth house rules the mother and the 10th house rules the father. But not everybody's on board with that. But it kind of made sense to me. And then lastly, just like I said, later in life, it's where you go to retire. It can Some astrologers that really have like very nuanced ways to look at charts, they almost see it as another house that has to do with death, because it's where you go to retire. But I'm not quite there yet. So let's get going on the sun in the fourth house. So, as we've said, the sun is really your sense of self. It's what you shine out. Typically, I would say what you shine out to the world, but this world that we're talking about in the fourth house is your family, right? So, your home life, your family life is like really very much your identity. The sun has to do with work. So, you could have a home based business if you have the sun in the fourth house. So the sun represents the father, right? But the fourth house more often represents the mother. So, maybe you have a mom that is kind of like both a mom and a dad, right? Because this is the mom ruled areas of life, but it's coming in with that father energy. Um, so yeah, just very much, again, your sense of identity, that maybe when you were a kid, like maybe just your home life was your whole world. Maybe you were homeschooled and you didn't have a lot of outside influence. Um, Maybe your family of origin is something that you show to the world. There's plenty of like YouTubers that's my son, when he was younger, used to watch all these vlogs, right? And they would kind of bring their family along with them when they would do just kind of like mundane things. So again, you're showing your family of origin to the world. Um, the fourth house also just represents the house, right? So you could be someone who wants to really show everyone your house. Maybe you are, a YouTuber who shows your decorating skills or something like that. You're involved in a lot of parade of homes. Could also just be a way that the fourth house sun placement plays out. And then again, whether or not you have planets in this house, you do have a sign on the cusp. So if you have Leo on the cusp, these are it would still also apply to you, the sun in the fourth house, because you still have that Leo sun ruled energy. Okay, so next we have moon in the fourth house. So the moon is at home in the fourth house. That's a great placement. Ruled by Cancer. So kind of almost like these fourth house ideals, but like probably on steroids, right? Very, very positive, unless, there's kind of like a negative aspect there. But in general, this should be a very positive placement. So, um, sorry. So, okay, this would be somebody who loves to be at home, a homebody. The moon it does rule emotion, right? Intuition. So this could have been if it is positively aspected, like you could have had a very emotionally stable childhood, particularly a very strong relationship with your mother. If you have moon in the fourth house, a very intuitive mother, perhaps. Um, and then, sorry, I shouldn't have wrote moon on the cusp. It would have been Cancer if you have Cancer on the cusp because Cancer rules the moon. So sorry about that. Again, we're still learning, but we are improving. Um, but yeah, so that is moon in the fourth house. The moon is reflective, right? As we've said in other houses. So just maybe a very calming home environment, people really like thinking before they speak and giving you like intuitive insight when you're at home. All right, so Mercury in the fourth house. Mercury, the fastest moving planet, right? It is busy with lots of energy. It's my favorite astrologer, Meg Moonbeam. She calls it the Energizer Bunny. And so in your house of origin, you may have had lots of activities. It might have just been like a busy house. People are always coming and going. Um, Mercury is all about communication, right? Their connection, talking. So you could be very connected to your family of origin. Um, Connected to maybe like your childhood home, right? So that connection is very strong, a big, dinner table with everybody talking and, just lots of love, lots of energy. There could also be lots of movement. So you may have moved multiple times earlier in life. Um, Somebody was saying, I think like military, maybe military family, that might be a little bit more Mars. I think Mars in the fourth house. But yeah, maybe, you had to move a lot because your parents' jobs or something like that. And then Mercury is, associated with like air signs, right? So it's knowledge, it's books, it's libraries. So a lot of information that you got from the home, from, potentially the mother too. And then you have these energies, whether or not you have Mercury in the fourth house, if you have Gemini or Virgo on the cusp, because Gemini and Virgo are both ruled by Mercury. So it brings that Mercury in the fourth house energy in. Okay, so next we have Venus in the fourth house, a lovely, lovely placement. So Venus is all about like, the pleasures of life, very peaceful. So you have a very, lots of connection within your family, very tranquil. Maybe like you grew up in a nice house, and maybe even if it wasn't nice, although Venus does have to do with money as much as it does like love and luxury. Um, maybe if your house wasn't even nice, like expensive nice, it was always decorated nice. It was clean, it smelled good. So that would be a very Venus in the fourth house. Um, because Venus has to do with, love and connection, you could have a very close connection to your siblings, the mother in particular, but both parents, just a very great, family dynamic, a very peaceful childhood. And because again, Venus has to do with relationships, you probably would not like to live alone if you have this placement. And whether or not you have Venus in the fourth house, if you have Taurus or Libra on the cusp, you will still have some of these energies come through. Okay, so next we have Mars in the fourth house. So Mars rules separation disputes. So if you have, say you had like, it would be kind of appropriate, like, say your mom wasn't a part of your life for a certain time, because the fourth house is the mother specifically. And, so this is separation dispute. Maybe, there was a time in your early life where your mom wasn't a part of it. Um, and then just any family of origin in general, but it would be most appropriate for the mother. Mars is got a lot of ambition to them. So if maybe it wasn't a pleasant experience, you could have ambition to then improve, push it towards that 10th house, right? If the fourth house wasn't peaceful, now you have a lot of ambition to improve where you came from. The downside is Mars does rule, conflict, violence. So you could have come from a very intense, maybe even a violent home, had a violent childhood. The fourth house, again, can sometimes just mean literally the house that you grew up in. So you could have liked to have lived in a hot or a dry climate. A military family would be super fitting because, this is the family, this is moving around a lot, and then just that military, Mars rules military. And so if you have Aries on the cusp or the traditional, so there's a few signs where they have their traditional ruler and now their modern ruler. So in traditional astrology, Scorpio was also ruled by Mars. So those would bring some of these elements to your fourth house area of life. Okay, so next we have Jupiter in the fourth house. So this is, as you know, Jupiter is the great benefic. So Jupiter could bring very positive opportunities to the family. Jupiter expands whatever it touches, right? So you could have even just lived in a large home. You could have had a large family. Jupiter rules teaching. So you could have learned a lot in the home, or maybe your mother was a teacher. Either one of your parents could have been, say a professor, but more appropriate if it were the mother, right? But yes, Jupiter is very positive energy, probably brought a really joyful childhood to you with possibly a large family. Um, because again, Jupiter expands, right? Whatever it touches, that, maybe you grew up in a place where you had a lot of land or something like that. Just that, again, meeting the expansiveness with the energy that Jupiter brings. And then you also have this energy if you have Sagittarius or Pisces. Jupiter was the traditional ruler of Pisces. So Sagittarius or Pisces on the cusp would also bring this Jupiter in the fourth house energy. Okay, so then next we have Saturn in the fourth house. So Saturn, kind of like the opposite of Jupiter, where it's so expansive, Saturn can be very like restrictive, right? So you probably grew up in a house with a lot of rules and regulations. Your parents expected, a lot from you, and you were probably taught to work hard. Saturn is the planet of hard work. So yeah, chores, again, it can be restricted. So like, I said limited connection with parents or family. Maybe someone with Saturn in the fourth house could be an only child. They could be, as we talked about with the third house and like with the neighborhood, maybe not being super close to their neighbors. Again, maybe this is someone who lives very rurally. Um, Saturn is also older people, so you could have been raised by your grandparents, right? You take your family responsibilities very seriously, because Saturn is like delay and you got to work so hard, right? That home ownership can come later in life. So Saturn rules Capricorn, and then traditionally it rules Aquarius. So if you have either of those planets on the cusp, you might be feeling those same energies too. All right, so next we have Uranus in the fourth house. So Uranus is the planet of shocks and changes and surprises. So you most likely had a kind of chaotic childhood. Or even if it wasn't chaotic, it was probably different, right? Maybe you had like foster siblings, or you lived with your aunt and uncle for a little while, or you lived in a super weird place. Maybe you grew up on a houseboat or something like that. But typically, like, it's not the most stable energy, so that's why I have like it moved a lot with a sense of disruption. But the good thing is it can make you very, very adaptable, because Uranus isn't necessarily negative, so if you took some of these harder, um, early life circumstances and then you learn to work with it, you could really come out on top and be a very productive person, adaptable person. And unlike the moon in the fourth house, you are not a homebody. You like the change. You might like to, if you're not moving a lot, you're liking to just change up your home, right? So if you have Aquarius on the cusp, you would also have some of these Uranus in the fourth house energies. Okay, and so now we have Neptune in the fourth house. So Neptune is the very dreamy planet, right? It kind of like illusions and stuff. So if you grew up with Neptune in the fourth house, you could have had confusion around your boundaries and rules. You could have like kind of floated in between different houses, maybe. Um, Neptune rules addiction. So you could have had, addiction could have been a big part of your early life. Like maybe your mom suffered an addiction. Neptune also, like the shadow side, rules mental health issues. So you could have had parents or maybe just somebody in your family of origin that had mental health issues as well as addiction issues. The more positive side of Neptune is that it's very spiritual. So you could have grown up in a house where, you know, you guys were learning to meditate to deal with your emotions or something like that. Your parents could have been spiritually very advanced, spiritual healers. So that is a really nice placement. Neptune is all about water, so you could like to live near the water, or maybe putting a fountain in your home would be really nice and calming for you if you have Neptune in the fourth house. And then you also have these energies if you have Pisces on the cusp of your fourth house, because Neptune rules Pisces. And then lastly, we have Pluto in the fourth house. So Pluto is the very powerful malefic, but it can be very transformative. So if you have Pluto in the fourth house, you probably had a really intense childhood. Um, Pluto is like the underside, right? The dark secrets. So you probably did have things that went on in your home that you might not have told other people. Or maybe there could have been secrets within your family that, didn't come to light for a while. Pluto also rules death. So somebody with Pluto in the fourth house may have had a death of a parent. But again, like, yes, Pluto is pretty heavy, but it also has the power to be very transformative. So if you have this placement, if you can learn to work with the tough aspects of it, you could have a very transformational life. And, that fourth house to 10th house axis, you could see where you came from, decide that you don't want to keep doing that, and then use that energy to be very transformative. And if you have Scorpio, Scorpio is, or Pluto is the modern ruler of Scorpio. So if you have made it this far, thank you so much. Hold on, I'm going to do a clunky change back. This will get better. Um, but yes, if you have made it this far, thank you so much for being here. I hope that you learned something, and I will see you again soon when we talk about the fifth house. Have a great day. Bye.